Well, how can we look at whether adaptation is happening if we not have generations of coral life in order to do those studies? The way we do that is, because I'm a geneticist, we look at the genes that these corals have. We look at the genes that the corals have living in different environments. Given new sequencing technologies, we can actually sequence most of the protein coding genes of each of these individual corals and look across about 25,000 genes for those that relate to temperature. And we do that, we find genes that are related to temperature. This is just one of them. And what it shows is that the individual corals living at warmer temperatures, that is time above 31 degrees here on the y-axis, those corals tend to have a particular allele, just called B here, at a gene, whereas corals that live in the cooler parts of the reef tend to have an A allele at the same gene. A and B allele are just different versions, different DNA sequences at the same gene, doing the same sort of thing. But what it tells us is that the individual corals in this particular genetic locus are different depending upon the temperature they live in. There are about 100 genes like this in corals. And they distinguish the corals living in the warmer pools in Ofu from the corals living in the cooler pools in Ofu. A map shows that these dots are individual corals placed on the reef. That's there. We know their GPS coordinates. We've tagged them. We know what temperatures they have seen every 6 minutes over the last 3 years. And the cool pool corals also, and these warm pool corals, we know which alleles they have at each of these 100 loci. And what I'm showing you here is that most of the cool pool corals don't have many of the warm pool alleles. Some have some. The warm pool corals tend to have a lot more of the warm alleles at these genes than the cool pool ones. So this shows that genetically, although these corals are pretty similar to one another, they'd never be called different species because of these genetic differences. There are about 100 genes at which they differ. Right now we're trying to chase down what those genes are and how they might act to provide heat resistance. We also can tell that the whole population here has the genetic reservoir in order to be able to adapt. Now, Liz was talking to you a little bit about this for tigers, where those reservoirs may not occur in places that have high bottlenecks, but in this case, in these corals, they do. They do occur. Yep.
Are temperature-tolerant genes dominant or recessive? And could changing climate affect the phenotype and make it so that the tolerant ones are expressed?
Great question. So are they dominant or recessive? They're what's called codominant, at least in the cases that we know about. So if you have two warm adapted alleles, you're twice as warm adapted as if you just have one. If the environment changes, then what else changes is another question. And what we find happening is when the environment gets a little warmer, that actually the expression of genes changes. Not just the physiology, but we can trace the physiological acclimation down to the genes that get turned on and off. And what's really cool is that some of the alleles that are warm adapted actually are just expressed at a higher level than other genes. And so we're beginning now to look at the wiring of all that and learn how the molecular biology of gene expression actually translates into the fitness of corals on future reefs. And that's just one of the ways I think that marine biology and molecular biology and all of these different realms really work together.